Welcome, everybody. My name is Heather Riggs. I'm Director of Administration here at the New England Museum Association. Welcome you to Ask a Conservator. I actually love these sessions because I'm such a geek when it comes to like all these things that I don't know about and all these odd questions that come up. I think it's really cool, but that's just me. I would like to welcome Camille Breeze. She is our PAG chair for the Conservators PAG. So I'm actually going to turn it over to you to introduce your guest today and to go from there.
Excellent. My co-chair, Barrett Keating, is in Florida. I'm jealous, but he sends his apologies, not really, for not being here. So my colleague, Morgan Carbone, is here with us. Morgan is Associate Conservator here at Museum Textile Services. And then our special guest is Ingrid Neuman. And Ingrid is the Conservator, I forgot your title, at Rhode Island School of Design Museum. Can you remind us what your title is?
Sure, it's Senior Conservator, yeah.
Earned it. And I've heard Ingrid speak a couple times with NEMA, and her knowledge of objects is astonishing. And today I have asked her to be prepared for questions about plastic in our collections. We have a really large group today, including David Colglazier, Conservator Emeritus from Old Sturbridge Village. And as always, we encourage you to contribute when you have information, especially resources or you've solved a problem similar to anything that anybody brings up. So we had a few questions sent to us ahead of time. So I wondered if we could turn it over straight away to Ingrid and invite you to maybe pick one of those questions and dive right in.
Sure. I believe one of the questions had to do with whether or not you could store your plastics with wood and or metal or both. Is that correct? I think that was one of the questions. And so the answer to that is no. I'm sorry. And that is because plastics very often off-gas. They have a lot of components. They have a lot of plasticizers and other kinds of individual elements which can off-gas, can migrate to the surface, can cause odors. And you may be familiar with a shower curtain in your very own home that, you know, when you purchase a new one, it's made of PVC, it has a very strong odor. Or if you're, you know, lucky enough to get a new car sometime, or you're in a new car and you smell that smell, you know, it's off-gassing, okay? So that particular off-gassing of the chemicals can actually corrode metal. So that's why I would not recommend that you store plastics with metal items or close by. I'd really try to keep them separate. I think the name of the game really is to keep your plastics in a different area from your metal. And then regarding the wood, wood is interesting because depending on what kind of wood it is, you know, whether it's oak, which is one of the most egregious woods in terms of off-gassing, wood itself also off-gasses acids. And the acids could be deleterious to also metal objects or plastic. So, you know, ideally it would be in an ideal world, and I realize we don't live in an ideal world. In an ideal world, you know, you would want to separate your plastics from your metals and your woods, because it just would be better for the long-term preservation.
Yeah, that's what makes composite objects so challenging, because we all can think of things that have maybe plastic and wood together, maybe something from mid-century, mid-20th century.
Yes. So, you know, with that, I'd just like to chime in. One thing I really want to convey to everyone on this call today is that there's a wonderful new plastics ID site that people might not be aware of, that's out of University of Amsterdam. And I have it up on my screen if I can share it. You know, I would love to do that because, just to preface, if you have plastics in your collection, the first thing you really want to do is identify them. Unless you can identify them, you really can't care for them as well as you'd like to. You need to identify whether they are stable or not stable. There are there's many plastics that are fairly stable. I would say ABS is a rigid plastic that is fairly stable. You know, polyethylenes, polypropylenes, we can talk about Tupperware. You know, there are certain plastics, but then on the flip side, there's some very unstable plastics like, you know, PVC, for instance, polyvinyl chloride, which is commonly in museums, as well as earlier plastics from the 19th century, like cellulose nitrate and cellulose acetate. And so it's really important to identify your plastics, and that is not easy. We're not chemists. I'm not a chemist. Most people on this call probably don't have a chemistry degree. Maybe some people do, and I am so envious if someone does. Because
Ingrid, I dropped the link for plastics on the chat, but if you want to go ahead and share your screen, we should be able to see it now.
Okay, thank you. Because I really want to share this with you. Okay, so I think you can see this. Let me just reduce that. This is a really exciting tool, plastic identification tool, which is fairly new. And we have the University of Amsterdam graduate students to thank for this, I think, and Suzanne de Groot, who's in Amsterdam as well. And so what it allows you to do is, you can see here, there's 4 different sections, and there's a flow chart. So by asking yourself questions which have to do with, well, just back up here, they identify plastics into 4 different buckets, you know, foam, elastomer, film, and rigid. And, you know, what's interesting is, I mean, you can probably do that, you know, but they talk a lot about smells. They talk about rubbing the plastic, you know, which may or may not be, you know, a possibility in your collection, but to smell what kind of odor is being given off. And if you were to be so lucky as to have a little sample available to you, you know, you can also do a burning test, for instance, a burning test with a hot needle tool. You know, I'm not recommending this to do on accession museum objects, but if a little tiny bit of the item did happen to fall off, perhaps you might be able to use that. But you can see here, there's the identification tool for foam, you know, asks you all of these questions. You know, so you're narrowing it down about when was artwork made, and you know, that kind of thing. And it's very helpful. And eventually you get down to you know, a possibility. So talked a lot about smells and touching. And can you test the object? Can you take a sample? Which sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So I wanted to, you know, share that with you. And it's just really an exciting tool. So I'll just stop sharing right a second. So that's one thing I think is really important is if you're trying to care for your plastics. And just a little FYI, I have talked to people in historical societies who often say, well, we don't have plastic because our collection is older. I would sort of beg to differ. I would say that plastics have been around, you know, ever since the 19th century, right? Or even 18th century. Amber, cellulose nitrate, cellulose acetate. These are early plastics. So you may very well have gutta percha, different kind of rubbers, vulcanized rubbers. You find a lot of plastics in jewelry, old jewelry. So, you know, if you do work in a historic society, you may not be off the hook for caring for plastics. So it's really interesting field. I love it.
Very interesting. I have a quick question for you then. We find lots of buttons on garments, and I've often wondered whether older buttons made from bone, ivory, mother of pearl, or gutta percha, whether they have different needs regarding protecting the garment from them. For example, gutta percha buttons we usually identify because they're a terrible condition. They've blanched and they have something on the exterior that looks like a crystal or something. And you know, would one ever maybe create a barrier of Mylar in storage if you see a button on a garment that looks questionable?
Sure. So yes, I would agree. Very often you can cut a little disc of Mylar, 100% Mylar D, which is polyester. So that's an example of a good plastic. We love polyester, don't we? It's inert for the most part. We love it. So Mylar D is a nice stiff plastic polymer, and you know, available through conservation supply houses. And you could cut a little disc and then basically cut what am I trying to say? A radial cut to the center, and then slip that disc around the button underneath, right? So it's not in touch with the actual garment. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I think that's far better option than to sort of preemptively remove a button from a garment, because there's a lot of information in there. Occasionally we'll have people bring the garment and the button separately because the condition of the thread or the condition of some part of it, or maybe they had been falling off and they were found in the pocket, things like that. So sometimes I've had reason to wonder whether putting the original buttons back on would be better done with a preventive step in the middle there like that. So.
Yes, and even metal buttons, right? I mean, some metal is very, you know, if I'm thinking about Civil War outfits, or, you know, clothing made out of wool or silk, right, inherently have sulfur in them because of the processing of the wool and the silk. So the metal button that is on these garments of wool and silk, you know, have a tough time, right? That's inherent vice. So they tend to tarnish or discolor. So again, it would be advantageous to put some Mylar D underneath each button by making a little slit in the Mylar and then slipping it, yes, around the button. I hope that makes sense.
So something I like to do also is like hole punch the center so that it doesn't abrade the threads. So that you have like a little circle in the center, you make your radial cut, and then you slip it under so you don't get the breaking threads.
That's a really good point, Morgan, because polyester, Mylar D, is very sharp. And even monofilament, which a lot of people like to use, that's another kind of plastic, right? Monofilament fishing line is typically made of nylon. It's very sharp. It doesn't seem sharp when we unroll it or go fishing, or but it's very abrasive. It's abrasive on a micro level. So, you know, so much of what we do as conservators, everything's on a micro level, a nano level, you know, and you can't necessarily see it, but we know it's happening. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We had a question from Rosamond Ray, hi Rosamond, about kitchen utensils, I think specifically metal utensils. And we know that they are frequently found in conjunction with plastics or wood or other handle materials. Did you have a chance to read that question?
Yes. So the care of metal metal objects. I would like to share my screen again. I have some resources, which would be, oh, let me see if I can find it. Maybe I can't find it. The CCI. Okay, no, I'm not seeing it right this second. The Canadian Conservation Institute has wonderful notes that are available to everyone for free online, Canadian Conservation Institute, and they have a wonderful metals section specifically on iron tools. And so all of these things are updated regularly. So I just wanted to mention that that is an excellent resource for everyone, really. Oh, thank you, Scarlett, for that. Iron is very reactive. Iron tools, iron is just super reactive. And as we know that from anything that we have that is made of iron. I mean, bumpers and cars used to be made, you know, right, iron alloy and things like that. But it's very handy sometimes to coat iron, but that is not something for the uninitiated. That's really for something, that's a procedure that's really necessary for someone who has some training in. But I think what's really important is to realize that air circulation is one of the most important things you can do for, if you're talking about a composite object that's iron and plastic together, you want to have a lot of air circulation. And one of probably the worst things you could do is to confine and not have air circulating, because you can have, depending on what kind of plastic it is, you can have this buildup of off-gassing chemicals. If you were, say, to put these tools in a box or something like that, you might want to have holes in the box or some kind of vent, little punch holes in it, or have little slits in the box or something like that. So maybe on the side, so you don't have the dust actually infiltrating the box, but maybe the holes could be on the side of the box so that you have a little bit of air circulation.
And something we haven't talked about yet, what if you want to improve a little bit the appearance of some of these objects? I'm thinking about Rosamund's mention about historic kitchen tools in a setting where you want to give an ambiance without leaving just everything out to get dusty all the time. What if you saw that some aluminum utensils were tarnished, and you wanted to know whether there's a safe way that you can surface clean these objects that doesn't cross the line into ingrained soils that require a more in-depth informed treatment?
Sure. Yeah, I think metals, in general, metals can be coated, they can be complicated, they can be plated, sometimes aluminum might be silver, it might be, it's tricky to analyze, metal plating correctly. There's nickel and chrome, all kinds of platings. But I think safely, I think I would feel safe and confident. I don't think I'm overstepping to say that it would be safe to use something like mineral spirits, which is readily available, mineral spirits. And you can get it in a hardware store, for instance, if you have limited funding, you're not signed up with Sigma Chemicals, and you're not buying 4 liters because you can't afford it. So for the smaller museum, the historical society, I think that you could get yourself some mineral spirits, and you could clean metals with some mineral spirits. However, I would use like a stencil brush. I wouldn't use cotton, because cotton's going to get, unless it's a very smooth surface, you could use cotton. If it's a rough surface, I would use a brush. But if you notice, I would do a small testing area. And if you notice that there's some blooming, we call it, or it's like a white fog kind of situation on your test, then you know that there's some kind of coating there. It could have been waxed. A lot of metals are waxed by other people, just as a preventive conservation measure. And then you don't want to get into that, because you may be getting in too deep for what you're able to do yourself.
Later, we have a couple of items here that if we have time remaining in the end, we'd be willing to bring out some swabs and see whether we can at least demonstrate a safe technique for some of this minimally interventive cleaning techniques.
Sure. Yes.
Sure. I'm sorry, go ahead, Ingrid.
Oh no, that's fine. I wasn't quite sure if that question had to do with metals only or metals and plastics mixed together.
Rosamund's question was on the list. It was on the email that you sent us,
Oh, yes.
Scarlett and Heather. And I'm sorry that in my confusion over my laptop, I didn't bring that printout back here with me. But perhaps if Rosamund is online, you can type additional questions. Anyone here can type additional questions into the question bar, and Scarlett will make sure that we see them.
Yeah, I like that question. Sorry, Heather.
Rosalind actually wasn't able to make it, but Meredith is here for her Tupperware question.
Oh, Aha. Well, let's jump into Tupperware.
The question was the Earl Silas Tupper came from their town and we have a box full of pieces of Tupperware. How should we store them?
So is it truly Tupperware? Because Tupperware is a brand name, right? It's a brand name. Yeah. So Tupperware, or Rubbermaid is another brand name that sometimes, no.
No,
Meredith, did you want to speak?
it is, yes. So Earl Silas Tupper grew up in Shirley and invented a lot of things and invented Tupperware. We are not keeping Rubbermaid or generic plasticware, but we do have information on his background, and we do have a box of, actually more than one box, of odds and ends of samples of different kinds of Tupperware products.
Nice. Well, I mean, to my knowledge, Tupperware is, polyethylene, or it at least, I don't know if his original, the thing is, his original one, I wonder if they were experimental at all. Do you know? Yeah. So
He started the production in nearby Leominster. We don't have any of his early experiments. We just have Tupperware that people have.
oh, okay. All right. So that Tupperware should be polyethylene then in that case. And there's low density and there's high density polyethylene. Polyethylene is fairly stable. It's quite stable, and it's often detectable if you're trying to figure out if it is polyethylene or not. It's a little bit milky looking. It's not totally clear.
True.
Polypropylene, for instance, polypropylene, another long chain hydrocarbon, is very clear. Polyethylene tends to be kind of milky, a little bit foggy. You can't always see right through it. But the good news is that it's very stable. And, that is the good news. And so when you go to the grocery store today and you want to buy something to put your sandwich in, because you don't want to use plastic bags anymore. You want to use something reusable, that's polyethylene. So it shouldn't give you any trouble in terms of off-gassing. It shouldn't, in theory. I'm just saying it that way because I don't know, with his early experiments, how inventors are and so forth. They try different things. But so what I would be concerned about is, well, not too much. I mean, unlike polyethylene, unlike like a PVC, polyvinyl chloride, like a shower curtain type thing, that gets very sticky. Garment bags get very sticky because the chlorine rises to the surface, makes it sticky, and you get hydrochloric acid on the surface. But I think you're okay, Meredith. I think that the prognosis, the future long-term prognosis for your original, Tupperware is good. What color is the lid? I'm just curious.
Oh, when I say we have 2 boxes full,
Yeah.
I mean, we have 2 boxes of all different colors, shapes, sizes,
Wow.
uses.
Exciting.
Yeah.
I know there used to be that wonderful plastics museum in Leominster, but I think it's no longer operational, right?
True. Yep, it's gone.
Sad.
Okay, thank you very much.
Tell us when you're having your exhibit.
Well, we had one when it would have been his 100th birthday, but that was a while ago.
So while we're on the subject of plastic containers, in addition to being artifacts, we have a lot of plastic in our storage areas because we've been teaching people the difference between safe and unsafe plastics. And in many cases, commercial plastics can be used successfully to store, say, quilts. But you have to know your plastics. And even for somebody like me who doesn't really know my plastics that well, there's a lot of information on these containers. And you'll recognize it from your search between what you can recycle and what you can't recycle. So for example, this says PP, polypropylene. You'll also see HDPP, which is high density polypropylene, low density polypropylene, LDPP. And then you'll see HDPE polyethylene and low DPE. So these four are all generally, or was that 8? You are generally safe to use. So this is a Sterilite container, for example.
So if you look on the back of your container here where it has the recycling symbol, it will have those letters as well. And then I've also heard that if it's a number 5 or a number 6 on this container, it's pretty stable as well.
Yeah, I wanted to know if you could confirm which numbers, if you happen to know that, Ingrid.
Yeah. So I, like most people, I mean, I'm very into recycling, and it's gotten so complicated. But the 5s, I believe, are polypropylene, PP, it should say, right? Polypropylene. And then 6 is PS, I think, polystyrene, if I'm not mistaken. So they are quite stable too. Getting back to the clarity, I think you'll find that if you use a 2, the Sterilite, the PE number 2s for storage, they are stable, but they're going to be a little bit not perfectly clear, but you'll have to open it to look and see what's inside. But the 5s and the 6s will be much clearer because they're polypropylene and polystyrene respectively. But so those are good. I do want to I'm so glad you brought this up, because when you go to the store, whether you're going to like Ocean State Job Lot, I don't know, Home Depot, wherever you're going to get these things, Michael's, these places, really be careful, because there are a lot out there that do not have numbers underneath them. There's just nothing. And I would not buy those, because very often they can be vinyl, what's called vinyl, which is like a pot plastic. It's like a mishmash of who knows what. So you want to definitely get one that, it has the 2, the 5, the 2 or the 5, the 6, I suppose. Yeah.
We had an experience yesterday that's very much like what you said. I needed some plastic, and we have a large Rubbermaid style tub full of plastic. And normally all we use here are polyethylene and polypropylene. In terms of sheet plastic, it's polyethylene. But when I open this bin, we may not be opening our bins quite so often right now, but we opened our bin and it really stank. And it turns out the plastic I needed was a very thin plastic. And so I pulled it out, and I recognized that that was one of the origins of that terrible smell. And indeed, it was a garment bag, just a garment bag that we saved from a batch of dry cleaning that we got from our conservation dry cleaner. And so if you have any doubt about whether a plastic is good, I think you should probably just limit it to household use and not in your collection, because even with our best intent, we still sort of contaminated our plastic bin, and we're not concerned about it. We're going to leave it open for a while, fish around for the bad plastics. And I think since everything's folded, I think after it airs out, we will still be able to close it up and have our tidy plastic bin. Do you think that's the case?
Yes. I mean, it wasn't sticky, right? Was it?
No.
It just
We do
smelled
have
bad.
ones though that do get a little
they do.
sticky, that sheet plastic after a lot of use. And we've used them they've been wet in the past also. They do get a little sticky.
Yeah. So garment bags, that's one of my pet peeves. So dry cleaners, that plastic is not intended for long-term use. And there have been many occasions where the plastic manufacturers put antioxidants into plastics to keep them from turning yellow. Mm-hmm. And so my understanding about the dry cleaner bags is they're fine for your dry cleaning because you're taking them home, and hanging them up, and you really are supposed to discard the plastic. Sure. I believe some people keep the plastic on because, they want to, make sure moths or something don't get in there. But the antioxidants in these plastics that keep the plastic from turning yellow migrate through the plastic and do eventually, I know there's cases where wedding dresses, for instance, that have been left in dry cleaner bags have turned yellow because of the antioxidant in the plastic. So I would not use dry cleaner bags as a permanent, or long-term solution for, anything in that you really care about, even in your personal clothing. Yeah.
Going back to the question about tacky plastic, it looks like we have a question in the chat from Michelle Nash. I just pulled an electrified lamp off exhibit that has a plastic coated cord that is tacky to touch, making me think it is breaking down. I'm in quick and dirty rehousing mode, emptying the entire gallery for water infiltration repairs. Is there something I could encapsulate the cord in for now that will not exacerbate the issues, but will protect objects near it from off-gassing?
Yeah, so sticky plastic. So probably what that cord is probably PVC. They are known for getting really sticky, and then it attracts the dust and dirt, and then it gets just like really, really messy and really ugly and dirty. You can, all right, it's the plasticizer that's moving to the surface. You could use distilled water on a cotton swab. You could, like Q-tips, right? Q-tips and distilled water. You can get distilled water at CVS for about $1.25 for a gallon. It's right there at CVS or Walgreens. And you could remove the stickiness from the cord. You could do that with Q-tips. But the thing is, just know it's going to come back. It's autocatalytic, we call it. It's just going to keep coming back. But that would be a temporary solution. I wouldn't encapsulate it in anything, but PVC has a lot of inherent vice, we call it. Yeah.
Michelle, did you have anything you want to add to that question before we get the next question?
Well, I felt that I should say something very quickly about the use of plastic storage bins, since this is kind of right up our alley. There are archival acid-free cardboard storage boxes that we're all familiar with. And for the last 25 years or so, we've also been employing archival polypropylene, corrugated polypropylene storage boxes. And there are pros and cons to each, which I don't think I'm going to go into now. But one of them is that if you have a rapid decrease or increase in relative humidity, like it's the head of summer, a hurricane comes through and you lose power for a couple of days, the potential exists for condensation to occur inside plastic. And this has a lot to do with the fact that paperboard or any organic container will not buffer, will allow the conditions inside and outside of the container to balance out rather quickly. But in a plastic container, that won't happen. The conditions inside the box will remain much longer and take a longer time to level out. And that's the moment when you can have condensation. So if you are using plastic for any object storage, we always recommend that you have a buffer, like a piece of muslin or a piece of acid-free tissue. Don't buy buffered tissue, just buy unbuffered for everything. It's like going to go on my tombstone. Although that does cut down on the visibility of what's in the box, we do recommend that you have one of those two safe materials between, especially textiles, which so rapidly will absorb any condensation, because we're trying to, again, just slow down all the natural processes that just happen throughout the year in any kind of building. So now nobody's gonna hopefully just throw everything directly into Tupperware.
Thanks, Camille.
Yeah.
It looks like Philip Fishman asked, we have some World War II era photo albums and the original owner had laminated the individual pages. Will this off-gas onto the photographs and cause damage? If so, would you recommend removing the plastic covering?
Well, without knowing what the plastic is, it's a little bit hard. I would say, so the question is like, is the album itself and the way it was donated and how it's being presented, is that important to the, the significance of the historical presentation? If not, I mean, it would be ideal, I think, to remove the photographs if you can do that safely. But those photographs, I don't know if they're stuck down with some kind of glue. It's a little bit of a complicated question. Sometimes, I mean, it's historical. I think it was a historical World War II album. So maybe you want to leave it original owner. Not all plastic off gases. I need to clarify that. Not all plastic off gases. As Camille and Morgan and I've mentioned, polyethylene, polypropylene, polystyrene, ABS plastics tend to be very stable. So I would say if you don't see any evidence of deterioration of the actual laminating plastic, maybe you can leave it. If it's not sticky, if it's not brittle, breaking up into little bits, perhaps you can leave it, because maybe the presentation is also important. Yeah.
Thanks, Ingrid. It looks like I got a audience question. Someone said their predecessor used silicone bags with some of her items. Would that be good to use with plastic items? Talking about those silica gel bags, to be specific. They just brought in some collection of Tommy, T-O-M-Y miniature toys, and would love to know your thoughts.
Huh. Okay, so silica gel is used to, either dry out an environment or increase the relative humidity of the environment. So it has to be maintained. So let's see. So someone was putting these silica bags, which I guess everyone's familiar with if you've bought electronics or shoes or different items. Silica gel, I mean, it is important to keep relative humidity down for the long-term, longevity of plastic. But I would not say that silica gel, we don't typically use that to control, the environment for plastic objects. It's interesting. This is why it's so complicated. Some plastic objects deteriorate in the dark, some deteriorate in the light, some deteriorate, with oxygen, some deteriorate, with sulfur. So they're all different. So I'm going to go back to that ID page, and that's why it's so complicated, and it's frustrating because I'm not a chemist. I just have to learn, study. It's really about identifying, if you can make an educated guess about what kind of plastic you think it could be based on those 4 categories. Remember, foam, elastomer, sheet, and something else. Anyway, and I think that ID page would help you identify. Yeah. But like Camille said, if you open up a box and you're overwhelmed by a smell, like say it smells like vinegar, then you have acetic acid, you have cellulose acetate, which was very popular. I don't know if anyone has any film canisters in their museums or historical societies, but the very earliest film canisters, were cellulose nitrate, which are explosive. And I would feel bad not to mention this. So if you have really early film, you need to open that outside, not be opening it inside. And you probably will need to dispose of it because it produces nitric acid as it deteriorates. You don't want to be touching it either or breathing it or anything. It was replaced by cellulose acetate, which was the next type of film, which is a little bit safer, a little bit. But when you open up the lid of the film, you're going to smell vinegar, and most people know, I guess, what vinegar smells like. So that's when you have that, and then that can sometimes be transferred to what's called safety film. Nowadays, they use something called safety film, which is polyester film, and that is pretty inert. I mean, it's polyester. Yeah.
So let's say you recycle your canister. Like, let's say you use the same canister for your cellulose nitrate for your polyester film now. Can that smell transfer? I'm just curious,
Yeah, I mean, as cellulose nitrate film deteriorates, it forms little beads of nitric acid. And so you don't want to be using that container for anything. I think you really need to dispose. I think it's kind of hazardous waste. Like you might even have to dispose of it through OSHA, ideally. You wouldn't want to just throw it in a landfill, right? Yeah.
Oh, it's so sad because often the most charming or informative parts of artifacts are the ancillary pieces, like a container. It'll get stickers on it, and it just has all this history. But sometimes you need to archive the photograph and not the object. And one
Well,
little,
Well, just one reference, maybe Scarlett can put it in the chat 'cause I'm looking on my phone, but AMIA, it's a group out in California that deals with film, preservation of film, AMIA, I think it's called. I forget what it stands for. I think it's in Los Angeles, but you know, they have good resources for you. Yeah.
Yeah, as does NEDCC. They have a time-based media department, the Northeast Document Conservation Center here in Andover.
Yes, great. That's more local. It's good.
Yeah.
Looks like we had one. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
We have another question in the chat. Looked like someone asked, what are long-term storage solutions for mixed storage situations with autocatalytic materials?
Yes, I think they're talking about like the PVC. PVC, polyvinyl chloride is, you know, really, it's a problem. We have art objects here at the RISD Museum that are made out of shower curtains, and we have some that are made out of garment bags, and they do get sticky. They are sticky, and they do turn yellow, and they are yellow. And so the long-term solution is photo documentation is what it's called, because these objects made out of these very short-term, you know, they were intended for short-term use, you know, shower curtains and garment bags. And what happens, like at least at the RISD Museum, is, you know, artists use these materials. They're cheap, they're interesting to them. Anyway, they end up in our collections, accessioned in our collections, and then we have to care for them. So the best idea, I think, is to photograph them really well, front and back, details, because eventually, to be perfectly honest, they're going to end up in this virtual museum world, you know, the world of plastics. You know, eventually some of your unstable plastics are going to only exist virtually down the road. And so you want to have really nice photographs. You know, you want to have a nice, a ruler in there or some kind of measuring tape. So, you know, you've got the size. You want to have some color indicators, you know, Kodak, or now there's some digital ones that are much nicer and more expensive, but, you know, color checkers, they're called, so that you can have accurate color rendition of things. But these PVC items are not going to last long.
Thanks, Ingrid. Michelle put in one other question, and I'm going to see if you'd like to unmute and ask that question. If you're
Hi,
there.
can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, so it's just interesting that you happen to bring up the safety film, but also the acetate, the cellulose acetate, because we in the same, I'm the one who asked about the tacky electric cord. So I basically we're trying to purge an entire gallery very quickly. And just all, you know, that old style vignette where then like they just used exhibits as storage. And for whatever reason, there's 2 canisters of film in there. And I know that, like, okay, if I smell vinegar, that's a red flag. And so I opened it very carefully, and of course got the massive waft of vinegar in my face, but the film is labeled safety film. So I'm just wondering if indeed that somebody is reused an old canister, or if I should just generally, should I be worried about explosions? That's the question.
So, right. I'm glad you asked that. You can never ask too many safety questions, you know, because there are a lot of hazards in the museum. You know, everyone thinks the museum is such a tranquil place to work, but there's a lot of hazards out there. So no, I think it's really cellulose nitrate film, which is the oldest type of film that is explosive. And that's the one that, you know, if you do have old film canisters and you can tell that they're heavy, you know, that there's something in there, I would open them outside. You know, you might have a loading dock. I don't know, you have some place outside where you could open them. I would wear safety glasses, you know, goggles. You know, I would do it with another person, so you're not by yourself, you know, have a buddy system, because you know, this is, you know, this can be, you know, tricky. So safety film, though, I mean, my understanding that the definition of safety film is that it is polyester, but I could be wrong about that. Perhaps the canister was reused. I think that is a, a possibility. The vinegar smell, that is not going to be the explosive type of film, but
Thank
it
you
is
for
going to,
clarifying that.
yes, it's not going to be explosive, but so it forms acetic acid on the surface, so it's going to deteriorate. And
Sure.
if you care about that film, if you really, it's important to your collection.
I
you
don't
would
think
want-
so, but I still want to know the answer in case it is. So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so I mean, you could have it transferred potentially. I mean, it would cost you some money, but maybe that's something that you could fundraise for or something like that.
As far as we can tell, it's a copy of our gang, like the little
Oh.
Rascals film,
Oh, wow.
but we don't know why we have it. Like, it has nothing to do with our community, you know what I mean? So it might be a situation where we would, try to find another home for it, because it doesn't really belong. We think maybe it was shown at the local theater, at a local theater somewhere. But yeah, there's a lot of mysteries surrounding that one. But thank you so much for, I keep firing questions into the chat. So I very much appreciate that, because again, it's just coming across, you're hitting all the things that I'm currently dealing with. So, and then I also asked the question about long-term storage solutions. I was kind of also referring to the other artifacts, not the ones that are deteriorating, but how do you keep the, when I'm putting away that PVC coated cord that's going to continue to off-gas chlorine, I don't have the luxuries kind of segregating that from other things in my collection storage, because we have such limited collection storage space.
Well,
What are your suggestions?
Yeah, I think what you could do is you could buy, I think if you bought, or you could make it too, but if you could make a tube of polyethylene sheeting, if you had a heat welder, I don't know if you have a heat welder where you can make your own bags or that kind of thing, or you could purchase some polyethylene sheet tubing, and you could slip the tubing over the cord. That could be helpful in terms of handling. And also it wouldn't get as dirty and dusty.
Oh yeah, super gross. Things so gross.
So I think you could clean the cord with the, Q-tips and distilled water. I think that would clean up the cord, but it's not going to stop the damage from going on.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Cellulose nitrate also exists in our costume accessory collections. It was commonly used as, I think it's one of the first synthetic tortoiseshell materials. So big hair combs that you see, and sometimes some other smaller things are made of cellulose nitrate. And as well as cellulose acetate. And large museums like the Met, I understand, have eliminated cellulose nitrate from their costume collections for the reasons that you've outlined. But I wonder if we have these things that look like tortoiseshell. Often you see them maybe out on the top of a dresser, maybe over a piece of mylar in an exhibit. Should we be concerned? Should we consider those as potentials for deaccessioning, Ingrid?
Yeah, so I know deaccessioning is a hot button. I don't know if I'm going to go that direction, but I can tell you that you could, if I agree with you about tortoiseshell, and I've had this experience even with beads, many beads. If they're sort of amber color, they can look like amber, but if you examine your tortoiseshell, your beads, amber, anything kind of brownish, orangish, reddish, and you see minute cracks or crazing, that is indicative of cellulose nitrate, because that's what happens. It starts to break down and it breaks into little bits. And I worked on, actually it was like an African, almost like a loincloth. It was leather and it had these beads dangling from it. And some of the beads just looked like they had exploded. Well, they had exploded because they were cellulose nitrate. But other of the beads were fine. So I just wanted to point out that on a given object like this loincloth, there were beads that were truly amber, which is like, a tree resin, and that's fine. And, it will probably last forever, the amber, but they had been mixed with beads that were made out of cellulose nitrate. So you can have both. I think a little survey might be in order. You could do a little survey of your combs and your items that might be on combs and buttons and jewelry, clasps. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I brought a few objects with me from my home collection. They're not accessioned anywhere. They're accessioned by Morgan. And I actually have, I'm not going to try and get the light. I have a mirror that is, I was told it was made of celluloid. I don't know much about it. I assume that it's been yellowing over time. Do you have any recommendations of how to identify what type of plastic this might be or how to store it safely?
Well, if it is celluloid, celluloid was, is a term for cellulose acetate. Usually it was made to imitate ivory, right? Because ivory is very expensive and so it was, it's very, what's noticeable about cellulose is that there's striations or layers, like lines. Do you see a lot of lines that are supposed to?
It looks almost, it has like kind of marbling inside of it, not striations.
Yeah, it could be bakelite.
Oh, cool, fun.
Bakelite, yeah. So I want to mention about bakelite. There's so much bakelite
another
jewelry.
example of bakelite.
Yeah, bakelite is beautiful, and it's it's fairly stable, and it's prevalent, at thrift stores, at yards, everywhere. It's everywhere. But there's some wonderful movies on bakelite that can be obtained, and you can learn more about these movies online about bakelite. They're really pushing bakelite. But in terms of how you could, your question was about the mirror, how you could identify it. It's a little tricky, but again, I think I would use the ID tool. I want to mention, because I know our time's running out, this, you see this? You won't because it's blurry. It's called the, there we go. The Plastiquarian. It's the Journal of the Plastics Historical Society. It's in England. And it's a magazine, I think maybe see it called the Plastiquarian. Anyway, it's a wonderful magazine. You can go online, and it comes out a few times a year, Journal of the Plastics Historical Society, and they do a lot of exposés on functional objects and different things that you can find in your collection. I think it's a wonderful journal. And it does come from England, so it's kind of a pain in the neck that way. But it's something to consider, because they talk about a lot of things like what's this in your collection, and ashtrays, and just a lot of really common, no nonsense things that you'd have in historical societies.
So in terms of testing with, I guess, celluloid or with cellulose acetate, I know that we find it often with sequins. Sequins are made with either gelatin or cellulose acetate, and we could test the sequins with first water. And oftentimes these sequins are falling off, so they're great testing candidates. And if they dissolve in the water, they're gelatin. And then if they're cellulose acetate, we also test with acetone. And if they dissolve in the acetone or get gummy, then they are the cellulose acetate. I don't think that this would be a good candidate for testing, just because there's not, it would make the area, it would ruin the area that I test. Yeah, but that would be really interesting to be
right. So that's the thing about working in a museum or historical society. We try to do these non-destructive tests, which makes things harder. Like with sequins, like you said, maybe one fell off, or I mentioned earlier, maybe a sample falls off of something and you can test it. It's tricky to identify things sometimes if you can't touch them, rub them, burn them, put acetone on them. And we don't do that, with accession objects. We have to be clever, we have to think of all these ways. And that's why that tool from University of Amsterdam is so great because it talks about, what does it smell like? If you rub it, does it have a smell of camphor? Does it is it milky looking? This kind of thing. And just a little final note, I know when I went to this class at the University of Amsterdam, they had this incredible resource library. You can start to make your own resource library, which I have done with plastics, and you can start with the really simple ones, but kids' toys and things you can find, at Savers, whatever that you might have in your basement. And you can start to make your own reference library, which is what they do. And you can test on your own reference library and develop a skill for, how to identify plastics.
Such a great summer project.
Yeah.
This has been so much fun and so informative. Whatever we may have learned in school about plastics, we've kind of largely forgotten. So thank you so much for emphasizing all of the important things we have as caretakers of these objects to do in order to better understand how to safely store and exhibit these objects. So just wonderful discussion. Are there any final questions?
I wish you all lots of luck, and don't give up. The world of plastic is pretty fascinating, but just try to separate those that seem stable from those that are not stable, and then just worry about the unstable ones. Although there's, as we talked about, there's limited things. Don't beat yourself up too much about those things.
Fantastic. As always, if you have questions between these sessions, you can send them to Nima or send them to me. And between me and my co-chair, Barrett Keating, we can help answer your questions or put you in touch with a professional who can. So thanks everybody for your interest in this Conservators PAG program. Thank you, Scarlett and Heather.
Thanks, everybody.
Scarlett. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.